Right, on to our third speaker, Andrew Walton from the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition.
Hello, thank you all for coming here. It's really good turnout tonight. It's good to see so many people engaged in politics. I'm Andrew Walton. I'm representing Trade Unionist and Socialist Coalition, standing in Leicester South. I've lived in Leicester since 1995 and I went to university here. I studied English and went into teaching for a few years, but then left to join the NHS as an administrator. I joined the Socialist Party as part of TUSC in 2004. I was angry at the war in Iraq and the betrayals of New Labour at the time. TUSC was launched in 2010 by the late Bob Crow of the RMT Union, who saw the urgent need for workers to have their own political voice. We say we've got plenty of parties who represent the rich in society, but there are none who represent us, and we're trying to do that. TUSC isn't a political party in the traditional sense, but rather it's a coalition of voices on the left, of independent socialists and members of socialist parties united on common ground, opposing all cuts and opposing austerity. In Leicester, Leicester's an important city for TUSC because two councillors left the Labour Party to join with the TUSC coalition, and we are standing across most of the city this election to offer people an anti-austerity choice. We have a common set of core policies which we campaign on, but individuals can also campaign on their own programme as well within that. So, to address the questions that are up for debate tonight. On constitutional reforms, I would abolish the House of Lords. Hereditary peerage and undue influence from the church and bishops should have no place, I think, in a modern democracy. I would support the separation of church and state in order not to privilege any one particular religion or disadvantage people of no religion. I would also be in favour of a genuinely proportional representation system, which would allow a genuine democracy rather than the first past the post. We're also in favour of votes for over 16s. And then that leads into young people and faith schools and the role of education. So the divisive nature of faith schools, I would also add academy schools and so-called free schools, which are being expanded under the Tories at the moment. We think that these schools should be reintroduced into a comprehensive education system. And I think religious teaching should be comparative rather than giving any undue prominence to one religion. Science education should teach pupils about evolutionary biology, the origin of the universe, etc. And it should be pointed out how this contradicts the teachings of creation myths. However, I would also protect the rights of individuals to practice their faith or lack of faith without fear of persecution, as long as this does not extend to harassing others. For example, I've participated in Leicester in counter demonstrations against the far-right EDL in Leicester, where we had the slogans of jobs and homes, not racism. We were protecting the rights of Muslims to freely and safely follow their religion in a multicultural city. If it wasn't Muslims the far-right were targeting, it could just as easily be trade unionists, people from other nationalities, or members of the left-wing parties themselves. On membership of the EU, we regard the EU as a boss's club. Decisions are made behind closed doors, and representatives of the European Parliament wield little real power. The real decision-making is made by the Troika, such as happened in Italy and Greece, where huge strings were attached to loans in return for economic bailouts. We would argue in Greece, for example, there's a party that's actually taken power called Syriza, and under pressure from the Troika has retreated from a socialist position. And we're arguing for more radical policies, refusal to pay the debt. We would argue that the rich speculators nothing. And we would argue for a socialist confederation of nations in Europe and greater international cooperation amongst working people in the continent in order to build a better future for 99%. And we'd argue this can only be done internationally because capitalism itself is international. So we would exit the EU on socialist terms and on internationalist terms. On immigration, well, I think actually the Democrat candidate actually stole my joke on this. My take on the Labour mug was that it might be one of those colour-changing mugs. When you put hot water into it, maybe it starts turning from red to blue, and it might go a bit purple on the way. I think immigration really is a side issue, which has been blown out of proportion by the media on a daily basis, judged by the hysterical scaremongering in right-wing tabloids. The real issue for me is how can we unite ordinary people across racial and religious divides in order to transform society for the benefit of the majority. Only by uniting together, by fighting as a community, can racism and intolerance be undercut. I'm proud to live in Leicester, which has a strong tradition of fighting racism and has good community relations in general. Immigration, I would agree, actually benefits the economy, provides Britain under capitalist terms with low-paid workforce and exploitable labour. Immigrants generally have fewer dependents and are less likely to be claiming benefits. We would fight for increased rights for immigrants, for a higher minimum wage of £10 an hour without exceptions, a clampdown on tax evasion by which companies could pay for this. Asylum seekers should be allowed to work and also claim benefits. At the moment they are stigmatised with just £35 a week to live on in overcrowded accommodation, and they are treated as criminals when their only crime was to be born in the wrong place at the wrong time. We have a responsibility on this, I would argue. We created much of the mess historically through the legacy of imperialism, and today through supporting the America in its conflicts overseas. And lastly, inequality. As a socialist, I'm passionate about this. Britain is one of the most unequal countries in the world, but at the same time it's the sixth richest economy in the world. Well, we have policies to address this, such as the increase in minimum wage that I've highlighted above. We would take the big companies into public ownership and run them not for profit, but to meet the needs of ordinary people. We would start with the banks, the transport network and public utilities. We could look at providing cheap credit for small businesses and lift the poor out of poverty. We would invest in council house building programme and cap rents and private accommodation, provide housing and solve the endemic problems of homelessness and reliance on food banks. We would refuse to cut public services in order to bring down national debt. We argue that historically the debt in this society is actually quite low. After the Second World War, the UK would have had to work 2 years in order to pay off the debt at that time. Yet we built the welfare state, we built the NHS, we built council houses. Now the figure is more like 80% of GDP. That's the extent of debt. It's nonsensical to say that we need to eliminate this. Instead, the attack on debt is an ideological attack on unions and public services by the Tories, and I'd argue both the blue Tories, the yellow Tories, and yes, the red Tories, in Labour councils like Leicester, who have slashed services and are sadly doing the boss's dirty work for them. So lastly, I would ensure that public services remain in public hands, and we would build an alternative society for the millions, not the millionaires. And we stand for MPs and the average wage of the people they represent, not an inflated salary, and with only reasonable expenses. I think that sets us aside from all the main parties.